Hey all, thanks for joining yet another webinar hosted by IPXO. Today we are kicking off with a very provocative topic, IPv6 adoption. We will discuss the future of IPv6 and the progress and challenges ahead. So before we begin, I would like to introduce the industry experts, Natalie Kuhneman-Treneman, Product Manager at AMSIX, Marco Schmidt, Registration Service Manager at RIPE-NCC, Matthew Wilder, Senior Engineer at TELUS and Advisory Council at ARIN, and myself, Vincentas Grinius, co-founder at IPXO. So, guys, I'm grateful and happy to have all here, and thank you very much for accepting my invitation to initiate such an important topic for today. Perhaps I would like to start from Marco. Marco, what do you see from the allocation perspective? What is the rough percentage and what industries get the most of the IPv6 allocations?
Yeah, no, sure. In preparation for that webinar, and by the way, thank you for inviting me, I digged up some numbers, and I was especially looking on our latest or youngest members, so the ones that joined within the last 2 years, and we are talking about roughly a bit less than 2,000 such new members, and from the IPv6 allocation perspective, actually to begin with the bad news, around 40% even don't have an allocation. They never requested one, or they even transferred it away. And the other 60% have an allocation received from the RIPE-NCC, but only of the 60%, 20% actually are seen right now in the BGP. And looking at different industries, there's clearly regular ISPs, IT services, consultancies. They are the most active one. On the ones that actually are seen in BGP, around 30% of them are coming from regular ISPs, and then followed by around 20% by mobile operators, and on third place, software vendors with a bit more than 10%. And when looking then at the ones that don't announce it yet or don't even have IPv6 allocations, there are also still around 20% of the ISPs in both groups, and around 15% mobile operators. So while naturally those groups are the biggest requesters or biggest part of our membership anyhow, you can see the most active ones are indeed ISPs and mobile operators.
So I remember your article about stockpiling the IPv6. How do you see this phenomenon evolving further? Because like what you say is the case that this phenomenon could evolve further.
Yeah. I would say it has at this moment stalled. It was this interesting trend that I reported that some organizations collected a lot of IPv6 allocations and then offered them to interested people to get parts of them. I think at this moment, also because we from the RIPE-NCC are now questioning more why transfers are being needed, why the receiving party needs so many IPv6 allocations, and so far we haven't received any answer in line with our V6 policies. That kind of has stopped the trend for now. And yeah, we will look deeper into it next year.
Do you think this is temporary?
Difficult to say. It is still not really clear for what these organizations need so much IPv6 and what is their business case. And I think so far it was easy to do it. There were not much costs involved. And I guess it becomes, well, as more difficult it might get, as more they will look if it's really a good business case for them.
Right. Okay, interesting. So, Natalie, perhaps you can give us a little bit more background from the internet exchange perspectives. What do you see from the traffic payload? How much of the IPv6 traffic payload goes through IPv6 and the internet exchange?
Yes, thanks, Presentas. So I did some digging in preparation for this webinar, and it's fascinating, really. I picked two countries because M6, of course, has the big platform here in Amsterdam, and that's exists now for 30 years, so quite a while. It was one of the first internet exchange points ever who implemented IPv6. Although the Netherlands was kind of always lagging behind other countries with the deployment of V6, M6 in the beginning had quite a high percentage of the total volume of traffic over IPv6 compared to, and that was interesting because for a long time the residential ISPs in the Netherlands that were peering on the platform didn't do IPv6. Content was offered over IPv6, but the residentials didn't. So on a peering platform, you exchange traffic, right? Now, while in the Netherlands, overall, the IPv6 users percentage, according to Google, is around 44%, which means that 44% of the residential users in the Netherlands go to google.com over an IPv6 connection. You see that the IPv6 traffic volumes on M6 are now, 2024, quite low. It's around 10% of the total traffic. So which makes you wonder, how does that work? And that is because the residential providers now that offer IPv6 have a direct connection, a private interconnect essentially, with the providers like Akamai and Google. So they offloaded that from the peering platform. And that's typically what you see, that when a country starts with IPv6, where the content providers already offer it, then when you initially you see the percentage going up for IPv6 on the platform. And once that is established, you see them moving over to a private interconnect. So where for M6, the IPv6 volumes now for Amsterdam platform are roughly 8%. Lagos is a very peculiar case because Lagos, if you look at the Google statistics, currently only 4% of the population accesses Google over IPv6. That's 4%. While on the Lagos M6 Lagos platform, because we operate exchanges in other countries as well, it's nearly 10%. So that's 6% higher than the country average or the country percentage. So that is where you see, and I'm going to drop, if you're okay with that, a link in the chat where you can see the APNIC statistics. Yes? Oh, sorry. Where you can see
Sure.
Yeah, where you can see the IPv6 statistics for Lagos or for Nigeria, actually, which are fascinating because you see in 2024, all of a sudden, you see a really steep incline in IPv6. And that is also reflecting on our peering platform, but we're pretty sure that in 1 or 2 years, you will see that moving down again as they get private interconnects.
So, if I understand it correctly, the usage of IPv6 mainly comes from the residential networks, right?
And the consummation of content over IPv6 from Akamai, Cloudflare, Google, etc. Yes, and
so
Netflix.
To the services that actually support IPv6, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we are dropping a lot of numbers here, a lot of percentages from a different perspectives. How can we measure the actual usage of IPv6 more accurately? Perhaps this is a question for all of you, and we can carry on from Natalie.
Yes, and that's an interesting case, because what do you want to actually measure? And it all boils down to that question: what do you actually want to measure? Do you want to measure if companies are actually using IPv6? Other networks, are they talking to IPv6 with each other? Is that what you want to measure? How much of what a residential user does on a daily basis goes over IPv6? So it's all different questions that you can ask that will have different outcomes in terms of measurements. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I would say that perhaps the simplest explanation is probably again, as I mentioned, the traffic payload. What can you do with it, and how much of that payload you can utilize over IPv6. But perhaps there are some other thoughts. Matthew, what do you think?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Natalie in the sense that the internet's such a sophisticated system of systems. Really, measurement is itself also sophisticated in the sense that not everyone can see every packet traveling across the internet, because there are so many of those peering relationships, so many different ways that different network operators interconnect. So yeah, we have to define what it is we're looking to measure and then go from there. It is interesting already the variety of measures that we do have, and those statistics are informative, but it gets harder when you start asking the question like Natalie did of enterprise to enterprise and that sort of thing. It gets very, very tricky.
Marco, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, the RIPE and the C is naturally the furthest away from the actual, let's say, IPv6 usage, or the how it's really being applied. I mean, it's like what Natalie said, it's depend how you look at it. For example, I can tell that 75% of our members, which is like 15,000, they got an IPv6 allocation, which sounds fantastic, but then already looking that only half of them actually are seen in BGP. And even that, looking at the more technical people here, that a range is seen in BGP still doesn't say much about how much is it actually used and for what and how successful. And this is where basically our knowledge as RIPE ends on that level.
It's very interesting, Marco, because I was 3 or 4 weeks ago at Internet Measurement Conference in Madrid. And, the researchers actually, their kind of, ultimate goal right now is to scan all IPv6. And, I met the guys, from Max Planck Institute. So they are actually scanning the guys who are actually scanning the IPv6. The rest actually are trying to, kind of triangulate, the scanning points of what everyone's doing up there. Also, the bad actors do that as well, looking for, some sort of, port opens and whatnot, right? But what everyone said, that they actually use RIPE Atlas probes. So that's a very good contribution to the research community on that. Right, interesting. So Matthew, since you are a senior engineer in telecom industry, and if we talk about IPv6, usually it always comes down to CJNet and dual stack. What do you see from running a CJNAT? Is it like a human resource intense or the infrastructure intense to run a dual stack? Because I'm sure you know that you can run IPv6 only networks at the moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I would say it's a bit of both, bit of infrastructure cost, bit of human resources. I would say overall, and maybe it's because my organization has a decade or more of experience operating IPv6 now. The dual stack is well incorporated into our practices. So over time, it becomes less of a hurdle. There is an initial hurdle, I would say, to get your staff aware and understanding IPv6. That's very true. Infrastructure costs for CGNAT, that's also true. There are certain architecture pieces that you have to account for very well and make sure that you have good systems and good support in place for those. But overall, yeah, of course, you're right. The operation model of dual stack is going to be the way to transition for even the CGNAT customers. You have to have v4 in some flavor in addition to the v6. So the v4 internet doesn't seem to be going away. And so managing a connection there, keeping that for customers of ISPs, that's going to be core to any ISP strategy.
Mm-hmm. So what was the biggest push up for you to kind of look into CJNAT? Was it the IPv4 shortage, or was it, some sort of the strategic decision that actually you want to be a part of IPv6 game? Because, hearing you that, it's a resource intense, from both sides, what is the driver for that?
Yeah, I would actually put it this way, that CGNAT is driven by v4 exhaust. So that's the first point, is that if we want to connect more customers, we need the CGNAT piece. And honestly, CGNAT has been around in some flavor for a long time. Like our wireless IPs, nobody or very few people probably have a smartphone with a public IP, right? You usually would get a private IP, and there's NAT to get out to the public internet. So that's nothing new. And really, so CGNAT solves that problem. And then IPv6 can support and reduce the infrastructure cost by having another path that offloads some of that traffic from your CGNAT. So that's kind of the pair or the coupling that I see between CGNAT and IPv6, and the value that IPv6 can play in supporting customers and connections without depending so much upon the CGNAT.
So I hear IPv4 exhaustion, but do you think the internet is short on IPv4 resources, or it's just inefficiently using them? Because, looking at the BGP, there are roughly around 30% of the IPv4 resources that are still unannounced.
Yeah, I think the question of exhaust is it's a tricky one in itself. The 30% that's unannounced does have a registrant or an owner, whatever you want to say, someone who is the holder of those IP addresses, and so squatting or using someone else's IP addresses is not really an option. Yeah, I think exhaust is maybe an older term and not totally descriptive of the situation we find ourselves in today, but scarce. I think it's safe to say that IPv4 is scarce.
Mm-hmm. So what's your take on that, Marco, in terms of the inefficient use, or some sort of IPv4 hoarding? We have many examples of those cases.
Well, we as a RIPE NCC don't really have an insight regarding inefficient use and so on, because I want to actually echo what Matthew just said. It's all the resources are being registered, allocated to a holder. They might use it internally or not. They might have plans for it or not. We don't know that. And then, of course, looking at some statistics of visibility might indeed give that impression. But I think there's also, I mean, there's a possibility to transfer, exchange resources. So somebody who really doesn't need it anymore, doesn't want it anymore, can find somebody who needs IPv4 and then go on with that one.
Natalie.
Yes, thanks. So as working for an internet exchange, I can tell you that not everything that's basically, sometimes it has good reason for not being announced. For example, a peering LAN. So a peering LAN prefix is not announced in BGP, right? It is a mechanism to give basically the members or the customers an IP on the peering LAN. So saying that that is not utilized because it's not seen in BGP is just not true. And I can't think of other use cases where something is registered and is definitely being used, just not in BGP. So it's a little bit tricky to say, okay, those IP addresses are not in use. Well, that is actually not, you don't know that. They're not seen in BGP. That's something else, but maybe for a good reason.
And just kind of random thought that I had. Perhaps the scarcity of IPv4 addresses and the actual market price for the IP address makes it a very efficient resource because everyone knows how much that resource costs. It's just a reflection kind of on that thing. And talking about the actual IP brokerage, so is there IP brokerage or IP leasing prolonging IPv4 address, and is it like necessary a bad thing? Marco, what's your take on that?
It's a necessary thing, I would say, and probably there depend who you ask. People will say if it's good or bad, but it's something natural. Like every scarce resource, if there is a demand that exceeds the supply, there's a price attached, and as long people are willing to pay that price because it fits their business model, it is fine. And so I have no concerns about that actually this tool exists because it's something that is just naturally there.
It's basically an economically driven asset.
Yes.
We can say that. Right. And how does RIPE NCC balance its role as a steward of internet resources with a growing commercial reliance on IPv4 addresses, for leasing and brokerage? Because, you guys are kind of, in a dual role here.
Well, as a steward, I mean, one of our biggest roles actually is to ensure the accuracy of the registry, that it's clear who is using what resources and that is properly registered. The forces of the market, like that a resource is needed or not, there we don't have any influence on it. I sometimes compare it with a regular land registry, because we are the registry of the virtual lands of all the IP blocks. But if on the housing market the land registry would say, oh, we don't update any ownership anymore, it stays as it is, what would happen on the housing market? People would sell it black and still the original owner would be registered, but already somebody else holds it and nobody knows anymore. So even if you would want to, we could not stop the forces of the market. So the best thing is to enable transfers, resource updates, and ensure that they are properly registered, like any good registry should do.
Mhm. And actually, there is going a hot topic. I just remembered about ICP2, if you know what I mean. So it's an interesting thing. I would like to expand a little bit on the registry standpoint. The actual environment, right, for the internet to evolve. Don't you think that, like, for example, policies and the mechanisms that exist right now, shouldn't they be some sort of harmonized? I remember we spoke a few weeks ago with Steve Crocker about the data harmonization for the WHOIS, for domain and IP addresses, right? But is it the case also for the registrars to kind of merge, and have one single policy?
Well, there are some global policies for global address distribution, but actually, I think something that is the beauty of the current internet registry systems, that we have 5 regions. And even though the internet is global, there are slight differences in each region, how things are being handled, what is the point of view in that region on certain aspects like transfers, for example. So, and if actually this very agile and dynamic system of policy development in the 5 regions has been proven very resilient. If there is in one region a policy change that is beneficial, it's usually be adapted in the same or similar shape in all other regions. So I think actually this model allows much more flexibility and also adapt to regional differences because they're out there.
What's your take on that, Matthew? Because you are advisory council at ARIN, so perhaps you have your thoughts about it.
Yeah, I'll just preface this with saying I don't speak on behalf of ARIN, but I can definitely speak as a member and as a member of the advisory council, my personal opinions. So yeah, I would completely agree with what Marco has just said. So ICP2 talks about kind of regional support. So having the constituent members of the internet registry that's local there, supporting the registry and the policy development process that takes shape in each RIR, really does give opportunity for the local members to express their opinions and develop policies that align with what is agreed upon in that community. And it may be different. There are different flavors. As Marco said, some policies work well everywhere. And so you will see some policies crop up maybe first at RIPE or APNIC, and then at ARIN, or vice versa. And then there may be policies that just don't carry over because there's some regional difference, and that could be, even in terms of things like data privacy and what concerns or thoughts people have on that, which often varies between different regions. So yeah, I would agree that the regional system is working very well overall as far as giving opportunity for members and participants in industry to shape those policies and to have effective registries that really benefit the members in the way that they expect and hope.
So what I hear basically that the policies are basically built upon the cultural and the certain community kind of act, let's put it this way, so that it would kind of fit the community's needs, basically, right? So if we would rewind the time a little bit and reflect on the actual IPv4 allocations and how they were happening, what lessons we could learn allocating IPv6 addresses. Perhaps, Marco, you can reflect a bit.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think quite some lessons were already learned when the policies for IPv6 were developed. Indeed, already even the protocol of IPv6 itself tried to address some shortcomings of IPv4, especially about the scalability and routing tables and so on. So probably there would be some nuances that still can be improved. I think we were in a way to really promote IPv6, make it easy to get it out amongst the people, which is a good thing because it was a new protocol. People were reluctant to use it. Some people are still reluctant to use it. I think it still would be good to get some feedback from people organizations who deployed IPv6 or plan to deploy. What are the exact plans? What are the deployment plans? What are the deployment experiences? And then build this into also eventually the policy development further.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I have a little bit maybe a controversial take on this.
Do it.
Because, yes, so here's the thing. I was an IPv6 trainer for more than 12 years. So almost every other week I was standing in front of a group of network engineers who have been dealing and working with IPv4 very happily for the last 20 years, right? And then I also, because I was developing the training course, went to the IETF meetings where the RFCs were made for IPv6.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, it became every week harder to justify all these complexities of IPv6 to these IPv4 engineers if you see that the RFCs are not made by network engineers. So what I observed, which was shocking, was like, for example, the IPv6, IPv4 transitioning mechanisms, right? We have DS Lite, 6RD, Net64, MAP-E, MAP-T. At some point, I'm not joking, there were 34 different transitioning mechanisms. And this is being done. This is being done in the IETF. When they invented IPv6 a long time ago, the reason why we have in IPv6 something called stateless address auto-configuration, basically looking up a MAC address, doing some translation, blah, blah, is because when IPv6 was invented, DHCP did not exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why we got in all kinds of mess with IPv6, due to the early development, while IPv4, some things that were really convenient in IPv4 were not matured yet. 34 different transitioning mechanisms because vendor A wants this and vendor B wants that. I am, to be honest, highly disappointed in the IETF for how they handled IPv6 and making it super difficult for network engineers to understand the protocol, because it's not just a longer address, it is a lot more than that. And by saying just do IPv6, like I said for years, that's not fair to network engineers or operators at all. But I'm curious to hear how Matthew looks at that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my perspective. There's yeah, I mean, we all know IP. What makes the internet special is the narrow waist of IP, right? So IP is the common layer that abstracts what's complicated below all the different data networks, and abstracts or supports all the different traffic on top. Whether that's Netflix or streaming services or email or everything that communicates over the internet, it goes through IP. So IP is this narrow waist Very lovely feature. But yeah, as Nelly mentioned, some of those architecture decisions at IETF make it hard. So the fact that IPv6 and IPv4 don't naturally communicate, this is why we have dual stack. This is why we have 30 transition mechanisms. It's because we're trying to keep those essentially now it's 2 narrow ways and somehow connect those two. It's a very hard problem. So yeah, I think the amount of communications at NOG meetings is interesting too. You've seen probably a lot of different talks about different carriers and ISPs adopting one or another transition mechanism. And that's helpful. That's helpful for those communities to surface what's working and what challenges they're facing. Yeah, it is too bad the architecture is not simpler, and it makes it a very interesting job for network engineers. Absolutely.
And guys, the other disappointment, what I actually see from my side, by the way, Natalie, the things that you have described, it's basically, can we agree on the statement, the community is fixing the bugs in live production? Meaning that, it's on production server, fixing the bugs. So
Yeah,
I
but
think this is...
that would imply, like, who made those bugs in the first place? Is it the vendors because the RFCs were obviously not very clear, or I'm not sure. The thing is, in the ITF, there were things that I call clearly, obviously a bug or a design flaw, another person sees as a feature of IPv6. So the whole IPsec discussion that we had, that was embedded in IPv6 initially and then tossed out. So yeah, I would agree with that statement, Vincentas, but yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Yeah, but what I actually wanted to say, about NOG meetings and the other meetings, the problem that I see that only the same people are coming to those meetings. And I'm not sure if you would agree with me, but I see the same people all over again, in all those meetings. And, probably what, is needed is more of a community engagement, because you don't see, much frequently, the infrastructure providers. Well, I'm not saying about, the hyperscalers, they're always there, but, like, the infrastructure providers like bare metal, or others, they're not there. And, nobody's even thinking about the IPv6 at some point, when we talk to them, so it's also kind of, a shame. And perhaps the community needs to more engagement and, having those, 34, 33, you said, ways of, transitioning makes it complex, and nobody's even want to look at that side, because it's too complex for them to kind of adopt the IPv6.
If I could, I'd like to, yeah, piggyback off that comment about the other communities or getting engagement to other parties who don't show up to NOG meetings, who don't show up to RIR meetings. There is a huge cohort of members or network operators who are maybe you could think of it as set and forget. They've got their network set up and they don't do much with it beyond that point. They use what they have. And so I think it may be an open opportunity for the members who are engaged to reach out to those other communities, find what communities those folks are participating in, and try to engage more there. But yeah, we can't expect them to come and learn what they may need to learn still.
There is a kind of interesting thing, phenomenon, I would call it, from even telco industry, that a lot of, and actually, at Gartner, we spoke with Gartner researchers, and what we actually found that a lot of the network guys, their teams are so lean that we don't have no time for anything, for some sort of R&D for IPv6 adoption. There is not much of the tooling that is available for IPv6. Also, there is no kind of financial base why we should do that, and for them it's probably interesting to explore the IPv6 world, right? But like, for example, the CFO of that specific telco would not even bother to allocate the money because there is no ROI in that. you know so returning to the main struggles, Matthew, what are the real challenges for the network in adoption of IPv6, do you think?
I'm going to take a chance on zooming out. I'd like to zoom out a little bit because the network operators who have IPv6, I think we are interested in seeing more, of the other network operators that our customers communicate with, have them deploy IPv6. But as you say, there is a business case problem that they may have. What is the ROI? And if I could add that with Aaron, Aaron has a blog series about the business case for IPv6, and we're trying to continually add more content to that. One of the facets I'd like to explore more and help educate the community on is, if I'm trying to impress upon an enterprise to do IPv6, I don't necessarily care that their internal systems, their VPN, that all of that's IPv6. I really don't care about that. But as a network operator with many millions of customers, I want to make sure that the endpoints that enterprise has available for my customers to reach, I want that to be IPv6 supported. So I think that's maybe one of the opportunities to help enterprises understand what's the low-hanging fruit. What is the thing that's going to benefit everyone? Don't necessarily have to turn your enterprise network upside down and do IPv6 across the board. I don't think that's a good ROI in most cases. Unless they're scaling very rapidly. If you're scaling rapidly, absolutely you should be looking at IPv6. If things are stable, it's probably fine. But get those endpoints IPv6 enabled so that my customers can reach you. That would be my message.
Natalie, what is your message?
Yes, tagging on what Matthew says, so M6 helps partners setting up internet exchanges in different places of the world, right? In Africa, in Asia, in some places where IPv6 is no common good. But we want all of the internet exchanges to be dual stacked. So have both IPv4 and IPv6 from day one. And that means that there is a lot of hand-holding involved from our crew to help train also our partners in operating IPv6 on their network, on the internet exchange, etc., etc. So we see it also as a good opportunity to train. But in the meantime, they still need to have IPv4 also for the peering LAN, right? There is no IPv6 only exchange at the moment. So it is dual stack, which means that they need also IPv4 for the peering LAN, which means going to the market in some cases and buy a block of IPv4. We can assist them with that as well if needed, etc., etc. So it's, like you said, Vincentus, there is quite a lot of hand-holding involved in not just community, but also with partners, with customers, what Matthew said. And I think that job will be there for the next 20 years, I'm afraid.
20 years, you said. That's the question. You know, that
Am I
that
being
was kind of.
optimistic here?
No. I'm not saying optimistic or pessimistic. That was the question I wanted to ask you by the end. You know, what do you think?
Sorry.
How many years we will need for IPv6 to be adopted? But let's leave it. Let's leave that question until then. Marco, from the registry perspectives, what initiatives do you think could be kind of be the additional drivers for the community to better look at IPv6 as not from the kind of ROA object, but more like from the organizational and efficiency type of thing.
First of all, I really just want to second what Natalie and Matthew said about from the technical perspective, and they both are much more experts on that side. Looking at the more administrative part, I think we just should continue what we're doing right now to make it easy for everyone who needs IPv6 and also IPv4 to get it, either from us or IPv4 wire transfer, and really enable them to have the resources that they then can start deploying, using it. And of course, allowing interested parties to meet each other at events, to exchange experience, to be able to ask questions, find somebody who had the same problem, give some advice, some guidance, like what Natalie and Matthew did right now, to really get the community as informed as possible. Everybody in the community, everybody even making more people aware that there is a community there, that they're not fighting alone. And I think this is what we can do from the registry side.
But don't you think, and this is the beginning of that question that I wanted to ask, but don't you think, and that's, looking into very far future, but don't you think that, after 20, 30 or 40 years, we're going to see a completely different technology that can actually replace IPv4 and IPv6?
Yeah. Well, I wish I would have that crystal ball to maybe start with. So I mean, I always find it interesting because I like history. At every time looking back 100 years ago, there were books when 100 years ago people think, how would be the future within 20, 30 years? And normally what you see in those books, they looked at what technology existed at this moment and just made this a little bit more fancy, So looking at how fast our world develops, it is likely that there's something completely new that right now we cannot even envision in 20, 30, 40 years. But it's also possible that in 20, 30 years, there's still IPv4 there because it just works, and IPv6 parallel. So yeah, I think we would have another webinar. We need another webinar in 20 years and then look back what we said today.
Mark your calendars. Mark your calendars. Natalie, what you wanted to talk about the bright future here.
Well, what I would hope, because if you see the speed in which the technology is evolving, I really, really hope that in 30 years we have something so much better than TCP/IP and BGP, and we have something so much much better than that. We deserve much better than that, to be honest. That's my opinion. But you still see in hospital equipment and stuff, you see still IP addresses somewhere in a server with an uptime of 25 years under somebody's desk. There's still probably an IP address. We can't get rid of those ever, I think. But for our future, for our children, I at least hope that we have something better than IP.
Matthew, what's your take on our future and technology evolvement?
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with the previous comments just made, and I think to some degree, no matter if some new technology comes along, I think what we've seen with IPv6 proves that there will be some stability, right? People will still have IPv4 connections. I think even if we have some new V8 or whatever it might be, people will still have V6. And overall, maybe the question becomes, yeah, should there be a higher bar for, devices or network software to support whatever's the latest and greatest from a protocol suite? Because there are some things still that don't support V6, and so that becomes a question for a much broader audience than just network operators. It's a much larger ecosystem. How do you enforce that?
Mm-hmm. And actually, one of the interesting topics we had in the last RIPES meeting, perhaps the new technology and the new type of IP address will gonna be your mobile phone number. You never know, right? And talking about, the whole future and the governments, do you think should governments be involved in IPv6 adoption, or should they, start to regulate and force, the networks to adopt it? Marco, what's your take on that?
Well, I think governments can play a leading role by, for example, deploying IPv6 themselves, because I mean, they also then would be a big player on the market. I'm personally not a big fan of certain enforcement. It might help, but usually if something
Perhaps the incentives program.
Yeah, maybe incentive program, or just showing that it brings advantages. For example, if you want to make business with a government, or you want to connect something with a government, you need IPv6 ready. Yes, that would be a good motivator from the business case. And normally incentives work better than certain enforcements, because enforcements create usually a defensive reaction or avoidance and so on. But definitely, I think governments can try to lead and can think about some incentives for V6.
But look at China. They ordered to deploy the IPv6 for all the telcos. Now they have no choice but to deploy it until 2030.
Well, that might be a wider political topic, which political system and so on is the preferred one, the more effective one, and so on. So let's maybe not go
Absolutely.
into.
We are living in a free world. So yeah, no push, yeah. Absolutely. Matthew, Natalie, what do you think about governments to be more involved in perhaps even leading by example type of thing?
Yeah, I really agree with what Marco said, just that leading by example in terms of what they're doing with their deployments and procurement. I'll use the word procurement. I asked the question on my last topic: how do we enforce adoption of the newest and greatest protocols? I think that's one of the powerful mechanisms that governments do have, is they purchase a lot. And so if in their purchasing practices, they say, here's what you have to do in order to meet our requirements, that's going to create a lot of attention and adoption incentive for different parts, and not just network operators. As I mentioned, it's also like software stacks and devices. So the entire ecosystem benefits from that type of approach, I would say.
Yes, I agree.
Right.
The
And
Netherlands.
I'm sorry, Natalie. Before you begin, I just wanted to point to the audience, if they have any questions, please feel free to ask, because shortly we're going to start the Q&A session. Thank you. Natalie.
Yes,
Sorry.
so the Dutch government actually has the comply and explain. They basically, that's already 10 years old, I think. So as Matthew said, the government purchases a lot of software, hardware, etc., etc. So the Dutch government said at some point, we will make it's not really a law, it's a policy that says comply or explain. So by default, every service, every hardware, every software that the Dutch government buys, also local governments, so also hospitals, etc., schools, it has to have IPv6. If not, you need to have a really good reason and a roadmap for IPv6. So that is the comply or explain policy. Has it been successful?
But is it a good policy, do you think? I mean, you know,
I think it's a good
businesses
policy.
can provide anything, you know, they're very creative anyway.
Exactly, that is the whole problem, right? So when it's a policy comply or explain, the list of parties that try to explain instead of comply is longer than the parties that comply. So in that sense, it's not really enforced, and there is a lot of explaining going on here, which is not necessarily helpful. So while the idea of the policy was good, the intention was good, the execution leaves still a lot of wiggle room. But you see that in general with policies, I guess, that are not hard rules.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, the kind of comply or explain type of thing, you know, could possibly lead to some sort of a bureaucracy at some point, unnecessary bureaucracy, don't you think?
No, every government has bureaucracy.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So this is I think this is for a good cause, to stimulate the adoption of IPv6, and so in that sense, I think it's a good policy. It's just that there is still wiggle room, and you see that with policies. If there is wiggle room, people take it. So yeah, but I'm Dutch, so maybe I'm biased, but I think this policy is not a bad thing.
So that question, how many years do you think we will need to get IPv6 adopted? And, you know, by kind of answering that question, think about it. Is it really possible to, you know, turn the internet IPv6 only? Natalie.
IPv6 only. So basically get rid of IPv4 totally. Until the last IPv4 address gone.
Yeah.
Right? That's what you're asking me, right?
Yeah,
this is what we're talking about, because we talked about
possible? And is it possible? You know?
I don't think so. Unless we come up with something better, IP agnostic stuff. But other than that, I think we're doomed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew.
I would say a thought experiment. So in that scenario where we're turning off IPv4 because no one uses it, what's the price of IPv4? It's 0. If the price is 0, there are players incentivized to continue using it. So when you think of it in those economic terms, I no longer expect or predict any kind of end for IPv4. It just may be less utilized.
Yeah, Marco.
And I'm right now also was even pondering about the question, what means IPv6 adoption? We could easily say IPv6 has been adopted now because many, especially mobile providers, are using it and it's usually successful. So we can say that. Or we also, I agree with Natalie and Matthew, it probably, as long as there comes to something completely new, it never will be 100% adopted, because like what Natalie said, as long not the latest 25, 35-year-old server under somebody's desk dies of natural causes, there will be some IPv4 used somewhere. So we can say everything from IPv6 is now adopted, or it never will be 100% adopted, which is maybe not the answer we were looking for, but that's the reality.
You know, I remember back 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, 5 years ago. I was talking with some technical guys at Aaron meeting, you know, and we said, you know, we'll need another 5 years to adopt IPv6, and I'm like, guys, you really think that it's gonna happen, you know, within 5 years? You know, you have like continents, you know, that actually struggle to cope with, you know, the IPv4 things. You know, it's I completely agree with you all about the way how we actually going to adopt IPv6, and I think this is a very important to understand that IPv6 will find its way on the technical stack. It definitely is a helping hand for IPv4, but as you guys mentioned, I also think that IPv4 will gonna stay here with us for a while, and a dual stack way to go as of now. So what would be your closing remarks? How, you know, what the ultimate message to the community you should send right now, Natalie?
Yeah, for network people, I don't really know the audience. I would be very curious to see who are
Researchers, technical guys,
Yeah.
you know, all that kind of, yeah. So
everybody.
your message actually
Yeah.
is good. It's on the
Yes.
right audience.
So whenever you have an interest in technology, you're making money out of technology, that means by default that you have to keep up with technology. Otherwise, yeah, you're out of a job at some point. That also means that you have to keep investing in learning about IPv6, in doing IPv6. But yes, the reality is we're stuck with IPv4 for a long time. So yeah, this is what we have. We have 2 protocols. Sorry for that.
Marco.
Yeah, well, the message would be probably to add to what Natalie said. Also, don't be afraid. There is not a perfect solution. There never will be. As long your network works, fine. If you need to grow, look at the different options, make your own business decision. And indeed, we are constantly evolving. The internet will be evolving, and just stay on top of it without being afraid.
Matthew.
Yeah, to piggyback on those comments, absolutely, IPv6 is a viable path for some applications and for especially things that are scaling quickly. And I would encourage any network operator to understand what the options are, and to be informed and be prepared to invest when it makes sense.
Awesome. Guys, you were wonderful today. Great discussion. I hope audience is not sleeping and pretty focused on our discussion. So it's time to kind of, finish our webinar, because every good thing comes to an end. So thank you very much for today's discussion. It was really a helpful one, and I think we need to, all those type of discussions to organize more frequently, so that we could encourage the community to be not afraid of inventing, adopting, and working with the existing technologies, and one of them is IPv6. So thank you very much, Natalie, Marco, Matthew. Very good discussion, and hopefully we're gonna see each other very soon in person or somewhere in yet another webinar. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicentas. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.